We are back and we are joined once again by Hanno Hauenstein, independent journalist based in Berlin. Hanno, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for coming on the show again.
Thanks so much, Emma, for having me again.
Of course. We had to have you back after Sunday's elections. Very high turnout elections, highest in decades.
Yes.
84%. The Americans could only dream of that kind of turnout. But I guess before we get to that, can you just set the stage going back to 2021, the last elections, and the coalition that was in place prior to these elections?
Right. So the last coalition was basically the first new coalition that ended like the Angela Merkel era that ruled for like 16 years in Germany, which was like really sort of like the era of like sort of post reunification stability. And after that now came the so-called like traffic light coalition, which is like it was a collection of like the Social Democrats, the Greens, and like the Neoliberal Party. And they were sort of priming themselves on progressiveness and progressive ideals, but eventually collapsed because of mainly internal issues over spending, over budget spending. Like there was a lot of like internal disputes, and it escalated up to the point that the coalition collapsed right at the day, ironically so, that Trump was elected back in November. So this election right now is quite symbolic, as it really channels, I think, a lot of the frustrations that people had with this former coalition. Like it's really remarkable how low the turnout has. I mean, the turnout was very large, but like how low the numbers have been for the parties that made up that former coalition. Like the SPD, the Social Democrats, they lost. They have a really historically low number with like 16%. They were seen as this like Volkspartei, like the party of the people. But they didn't have that kind of low number since the 19th century. Like for them, it's really a turning point where they need to ask themselves, I think, like some serious questions. The Greens as well lost like a lot of like votes, and the neoliberal, the FDP party, they didn't even pass the 5% hurdle to get into government in the first place. And yeah, I mean, my reading of this is that, like, you know, I think all these parties' strategy was this idea that by basically co-opting or like accommodating the talking points of the far right that had been predicted to be pretty high and was pretty high. The Alternative for Deutschland party, the AfD, they are far right extremists, and they got over 20% now. And these like liberal establishment parties, they kind of like thought that by basically just co-opting these talking points into like a soft version sort of program, they can like, you know, reduce the threat of the far right. And really the opposite was shown in this election. Like it's this idea that you can basically, by restricting immigration and asylum, you can make sure that this is like make sure that there's a better situation for interior security. That's just like it proved to be not a good strategy for them.
Well, I mean, this is a strategy that neoliberal parties across the West have deployed, and it has not been successful. I mean, I think Labour in the UK is probably going to get hit next elections with some of this. The Democrats in this country lost by doing they just stopped saying anything that was woke and conceded on immigration, and Trump won this election. But at the very least, it looks like the worst case scenario has been avoided, Hanno, with AfD did get the second most amount of votes, as you say. But yeah, this is a very helpful graphic. The SPD, as you mentioned, which, you know, of the former governing coalition and the Greens, they took big hits. We'll show the amount that the SPD lost in just a second, but the center-right party coalition got the most, and then the second most is AfD, the far right. But if we could go to the change here, the second chart was jarring. This is the vote share in gains and losses, and you can see how much the Social Democrats just plummeted in support.
Right.
And the center right gained votes, but the traffic light coalition, you can see it portrayed there, the red, the green, and the yellow, all lost support. And then the other parties all gained, including the left party, which I want to talk to you about. But
Sure.
the AFD gained the most. And
Right.
thankfully, it appears like they are still going to be firewalled out, and that the conservatives, as of now, are holding and saying, we're not going to work with the Holocaust denying wing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, the AFD, as you said, like it really gained like it doubled its vote share. Like it used to be at around 10% last time, which was already high and already discussed as a huge crisis within like the German public debate culture. But like it doubled its numbers. It's now at like over 20%, as you said. That concretely that translates to a little over 150 seats in parliament. And given that like this party's major talking points is like kind of an attack on the idea of multiculturalism, also an attack of German memory culture, but also just like open racism and ethno-nationalism and all these types of like very dangerous ideas that are floating around in the epicenter of like Elon Musk and the American right now as well. Alice Weidel, the frontrunner for the AfD, infamously met with JD Vance just a few weeks ago in the Munich Security Conference.
Can you talk about her a little bit more, Alice Weidel? She's a figure that I think she's a blonde white woman, very much in the spirit of Giorgia Meloni, but is also in a same-sex relationship, right, and yet is very, very anti-gay.
Well, I think she is very careful in how she's wording this. Like she would publicly, of course, the AfD is running on whatever fear mongering is out there, and like and kind of like co-opting this idea of like scapegoating minorities to as much as they can. So they have a very clear anti-trans, anti-queer agenda, and she will publicly emphasize that she isn't queer, but I don't think she's said that she's not gay. I mean, she's quite careful how she's wording those things.
Not queer,
right?
Yeah,
that's where the line is drawn for her. But it is peculiar. I mean, she is in a gay relationship with a woman whose background that person is actually Sri Lankan. Like, so you would kind of like, and Alice Weidel has like a second home in Switzerland. Many people speculate that she's cultivating her own personal tax haven over there. She is a quite peculiar like candidate, like certainly represents this type of like more adaptable mainstream character within the party. Like there are other figures like Björn Höcke or Alexander Gauland. Höcke was like charged by a German court that he can legally be called a fascist, and that like people will not have to sort of pay fines if they do so, which in Germany, where freedom of speech is not such a big sort of deal as in the US, is quite something. And Alexander Gauland, who repeatedly publishes texts that are like filled with anti-Semitic tropes, and like who called the Holocaust like a bird's shit. I'm translating from the top of my head, but like I mean there are very like sort of like dark kind of non-adaptable figures within this party, but like I think Alice Weidel is like somewhat more sort of like is trying to establish herself, as you hinted already, as like this kind of German version of like Giorgia Meloni or maybe the Marine Le Pen kind of type that like hope to be adaptable and maybe in the future, in Germany so far there is this thing that we call the Brandmauer, the firewall, which is kind of like a common sense understanding among the established parties that there will be no coalition with the AfD, up to the extent that like parties will scandalize if there are common moves with the AfD. We can talk about this later, but like many people speculate that this success in this election might mean that like by 2029, but the next election cycle in Germany, there might actually be something like a coalition with the AfD. This certainly won't happen now. Like Friedrich Merz, the only viable chance for chancellor, the CDU candidate, like very explicitly said he won't do it. But many people are kind of, let's say, suspicious that this might be kind of the end of this whole firewall era, and that like it won't be possible to uphold anymore.
Well, I mean, that I guess rests on whether or not the center right and the center left can come together and make people's lives better. And I don't know if that's going to happen. And so that's the question here, right? Is like, what does this coalition look like? And will it just be 4 years of gridlock, which leaves more and more time for the far right AfD to gain traction, but also, again, the left party, which had a bit of a resurgence that I want to get to, because there is some positive news here as well.
100%. I mean, like it's the left really. This was the huge surprise of this elections. It made like huge unexpected gains. Up until a few weeks or months ago, it wasn't actually 100% clear if the left will pass the 5% hurdle. Again, these 5% is like the minimum in Germany for a party to enter parliament and to actually, gain seats.
And only 5 parties achieve that, right? So this time around.
Yeah, there's another party that like is run a new party run by like a former member of the left that splintered away from the left, that really just very closely, it's called BSW, Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, that very closely didn't get in. But again, the left got up to almost 9%. This is really huge for them. They ran on these type of like bread and butter issues. They ran on like basically lowering the cost of living, like making public transport more affordable, like making kind of like strengthening pensions and lowering like healthcare costs and all these kind of things. And one thing which I think is like really crucial, they were like the only party with like a realistic chance to get into parliament that like didn't throw minorities under the bus. Like they were like the only ones that were like we're not trying to play the blame game of like we have to basically deport all foreigners and immigrants and like basically remake the European constitutional system to oppose migration. Instead, they were very strong on like these kind of these again bread and butter issues like caps on rents. Like you could see Jan van Aken, the one of the leaders of the left party, running around in every interview with like a T-shirt that like said "tax the rich." I mean, so nice. The messaging was very explicit, very kind of left-wing populist, but also very social media savvy, in a way that really we hadn't seen before. And like I think the left was often seen as this kind of like post-socialist GDR kind of like a little bit old-fashioned socialist party, and this election cycle, especially towards the end, it really managed to kind of reinvent itself as this kind of like a party for younger people. It won the city of Berlin, which is like really a big deal. It's the strongest party in all of Berlin's districts. This never happened before. And I think for many people in my generation or younger people in general, like in 20s to 40s, it's almost like hard to compute that like it's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, and that resurgence, the party, can you pronounce it for me? Is it Die Linke?
Die Linke, yes, exactly.
Die Linke, which translates to
the left.
The left,
Mm-hmm.
The left, right?
Right.
And so with that exciting resurgence, which is really important, I guess, for the next 4 years, you see the collapse, as we talked about earlier, of the Social Democrats and the Green Party, right? More liberalism as opposed to leftism. We talked a little bit about SDP and it being Germany's oldest party and this being such a historic loss for them to lose this many seats. But what about the Greens? What was their role in the governing coalition previously, and why did they also see collapse? What is their differentiation with, how do they differ from the SDP, and And why is their collapse different than the SDP? What's their
Mhm.
brand, etc.?
Well, so there are like key figures associated with those parties. Like there was like the SPD was the main figure associated with the SPD was Olaf Scholz, the former chancellor, up to a few days ago. Like formally he is still chancellor, but like that's about to change. Now the Greens sent as their candidate for these elections Robert Habeck, who is considered within the party as the kind of like representative of the more pragmatic sort of wing within the party, leaning towards the right. I mean, I'm simplifying this, but like there is certainly a younger fraction within the Green Party that have been very much disillusioned by the fact that the Greens, were not very much like holding the flag of like climate activism, but like they were much more kind of eyeing to enter a coalition with the CDU. That was really what they were kind of hoping for, that this would happen. It is likely not to happen, because even though the CDU needs the conservatives, they need a coalition partner. They can't rule alone. That's like they didn't get enough votes for that. But they can very likely do it with the SPD alone, so they won't need the Greens. So I think the Greens, in that sense, are kind of the biggest losers of this election, because they not only did they sort of disappoint the party base that stands in for climate justice, for broader justice issues, that were very disappointed also by the anti-migrant messaging that Habeck was pushing. Like, and I mean, this is like a broader issue, but like the Greens have been very much front and center in financing both militarily, but also like symbolically and rhetorically the genocidal onslaught in Gaza. Like this is something that the Greens were really sort of like standing behind. The former foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, is one of the Greens candidates. And so in that sense, I think they will also have to sort of think how they can redefine their own profile. I think that's something that we really many people are looking at, like how this is supposed to happen, but it seems as if this kind of idea to let the pragmatist, maybe revisionist, or like just like more center right kind of like wing of the party take over, clearly didn't work out for them.
And that brings me very nicely to what my next question was going to be, which is how does the genocide in Gaza play into this, and the suppression of that speech within Germany, which has been very acute. Like we all know, it's similar here in the sense that Germany's been facing a cost of living crisis, as you talk about. Obviously, Germany's physical proximity to Russia and the fact that so many of the energy imports were reliant on Russian energy has exacerbated things in a way that's a little bit distinct from here in the United States. But there is also suppression of speech and protest as it relates to Palestine that I think clearly must have radicalized many people, including just the eschewing of the leadership you say, like the folks that were more pro-Israel. There's the one party of the five that made it over the hump,
Right.
the left. They were the ones opposing arms to Israel.
Well, I mean, even within the left, I think the kind of opposition to the assault on Gaza has been relatively mild, because it's in Germany, this issue of Palestine and Israel is such a divisive one, even more so I think than in the US. Like it's even within the left in Germany, there's so many fractions on different fractions on this issue, which is too long to explain at length, but like it has to do with German memory, culture, German identity, German history, all these kind of things. Israel is this huge sort of thing for many Germans. It kind of fulfills, I think, in a way, almost like a redemptive kind of function. And like the crackdown on free speech, on freedom of like, even in areas of in science and in the arts, and like there's been so many journalists and filmmakers and artists and people that have been canceled, that had their prizes taken away, that like had job opportunities lost over the past year and a half over this issue. So the crackdown was very much in the air, and I think liberal established parties certainly didn't even try to politicize that issue for mobilizing the masses. Honestly, the only parties that did was Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, this kind of like fringe new party that just very closely didn't make it into parliament. She was one of the few people who very consistently said from the get-go that she opposes weapons, arms sales, arms deliveries to Israel by Germany. But at the same time, like, she didn't land that message with like a younger generation that is progressive in other areas, because she also repeated this type of like anti-trans, anti-immigrant messaging that the right has established for itself as well. She tried to establish herself as this kind of like populist leader that just like sort of like uses whatever works. And within the left, I think increasingly over the past months, the opposition against like sort of Germany's unwavering support for Israel was growing a little bit, and like I think that really helped them as well. Like just a few days ago, Jan van Aken, one of the two new party leadership personnel people, he said that of course he would support the ICC's arrest warrants, Karim Khan's ICC arrest warrants for Netanyahu if Netanyahu came to Berlin. And he called, Friedrich Merz only 24 hours after he was elected, and as the new chancellor of Germany, he said that he invites Netanyahu, very, very clearly, directly rejecting the ICC arrest warrants. And Jan van Aken, the left leader, he called this a catastrophic decision. And I think this is also like, for the left party, that again has been a little bit like, there's been some conflict over this issue in the past. I think this is quite a new vocabulary. This is like a new tone we're hearing there. Like they're really setting themselves up to be more sort of outspoken on that.
Or at least oppositional to Netanyahu, which is, I feel like, the easy get out of jail free card for anyone.
Shouldn't be too hard. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like, I mean, man. But it shouldn't be, but it is apparently here in this country and yours as well. Hanno, thanks so much for coming on. I guess I'll ask you one wrap-up final question here.
Sure.
Is the overall theme of this election worst case scenario avoided, but there's still a lot to do and a lot that could go wrong with this level of support for the AfD in the next few years?
Oh yeah, I mean, like it's a very sort of mixed feelings elections. A lot could go wrong. The AfD is like has neo-fascist elements within them. They've worked with right-wing extremists. They are a deeply fascist party. And the fact that 1 in 5 voters in Germany voted for them is pretty unsettling. And the fact that like Friedrich Merz, the one more thing I'll tell you listeners is like that again, only 24 hours after the CDU got this was elected as the strongest party, it issued a so-called kleine Anfrage. It's like a parliamentary inquiry. Which includes like around 500 questions on like the funding and the political neutrality of like NGOs in Germany. And these NGOs, they most of them are like civil society actors, but they included groups such as like Omas gegen Rechts, like grandmas against the rights. Like it's almost like, it almost reads as like political parody, but it's really kind of unsettling that like the CDU, that is supposed to be holding up this firewall against the far right, is really intimidating civil societies, intimidating journalists and NGOs on whether they are politically neutral, when these NGOs are all of them are like liberal left leaning. So I think we're really seeing a shift, which is in many ways very similar to what is happening in the US. Like it's like maybe not to the extent of like austerity, but like we certainly see like Germany is moving to the right. There's no question about it. and the kind of dismantling of like the the rule-based order, like international law, this sort of like idea that you can pick and choose where the ICC has jurisdiction, where it doesn't have jurisdiction, the hard right anti-immigration sort of rhetoric that has become kind of like the new normal in Germany. That's really ringing a sound that's very reminiscent of like this darker chapters in German history. And like, I think there's no reason the left did gain like votes, and that's wonderful. But like, I think there's no reason to lean back and relax. I think there's a lot of like, internally, there are going to be a lot of like difficult weeks and months and years ahead. And in many ways, this also has like global repercussions. It's a question whether, like how will the European Union realign with Germany being this kind of like more nationalist country and actor right now. Like, this is going to be interesting times.
Yep. Well, absolutely. Hanno, really appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming on and informing us about this throughout this last electoral process. Independent journalist based in Berlin, Hanno Hauenstein. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Emma. Have a great evening.
You too.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.